is our first ever Phoenix Forum. Thank you to Beta Spring for hosting us, and thank you to all of our panelists who we will get to meet shortly. Phoenix Forum, the idea is we are going to get off of Twitter, get off of Instagram, even get out of the paper for a minute, and hopefully periodically meet here in the flesh, in real life, and talk about the things that really matter to Rhode Island, the issues that feel most urgent. And nothing feels much more urgent than the environment, climate change, and the changes that might bring to our state. That combined with the fact that we currently have the highest unemployment rate in the country, which was 9.0%. I think today it went down to 8.7%. But it's high, which puts us in a really bad place. And the question we're asking in this week's Phoenix and in tonight's panel is, considering the changes and the challenges the state faces with our environment, and considering our economic challenges that we face, why isn't Rhode Island the greenest state in the country? So, I'm really excited about the group of people we have to help us answer that question. To my left is Jamie Rhodes, Director of Clean Water Action RI and the President of the Environmental Council of Rhode Island. We also have Christine West, a Principal at KITE Architects of Providence, Chair of the Providence City Plan Commission, and the 2008 winner of the Providence Sustainable House Competition. We have Abel Collins, Program Manager for the Rhode Island chapter of the Sierra Club, and a recent candidate for U.S. Congress. We have Frank Carini, co-founder and editor of ecoRI News, which you should all know about if you don't, featured in a December issue of the Providence Phoenix. And last but not least, we have Sheila Dormody, the City of Providence's first ever Director of Sustainability, who was also named just this week Acting Policy Director for the city, and she is a Commissioner of the Rhode Island Resource Recovery Corporation. So, to kick things off, I'm actually just going to ask each of the panelists to take a minute and see if we can answer that question. Why isn't Rhode Island the greenest state in the country right now?
So I've had a difficult time with this question ever since Phil asked me, like maybe 10 days ago, to first struggle with the idea of why is Rhode Island not the greenest state in the country. My answer was, well, we're not necessarily the greenest state in the country, but we've got to be pretty close. So I'm not sure if I would necessarily go so far as to say that we're not at the top. I mean, we're doing really well in a number of things, and we can improve on a lot of other things, but I also don't know how to measure what's the greenest state in the country. I know, getting a chance to read the article today, I think Phil had that same problem of trying to figure out, how do you even determine such a metric? Is there any way to determine it? I look forward to the day to find out. So I try to put this in perspective in the way of what are we doing well and what aren't we doing well on. And I would say that if we look at measure of progress over a recent period of time, I would say that we've done a fantastic job. In fact, if we look at the quality of the bay over the last 20 years, if we look at the reduction of beach closures, for example, I mean, recent numbers show that beach closures have dropped 35% just over the last 3 years. And that's a number that we should all be proud of. And that shows that we're taking steps on reducing stormwater runoff, reducing cesspool overflows, phasing out cesspools and managing our water in a more effective and efficient manner. And we look at the work on the CSO project, the Combined Sewer Overflow Project in Providence, is having a direct impact on the quality and health of the Narragansett Bay. And that, as an economic driver of the state of Rhode Island, needs to be one of the core metrics that we look at. And so, no, it's not the cleanest body of water in the nation, but at one point it probably rivaled for the dirtiest as a legacy of the Industrial Revolution, how long we've been using it as a essential open water sewer for so many decades, that the progress that we've made should be a way to think about, we are getting on that path to be one of the greenest states out there. But there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of holes in that situation, and that kind of comes down to both a lack of political will to take on environmental issues. And the economy's been, we keep seeing the economy versus the environment seems to be a dichotomy. I think it's a fake one. I think it's one that people are using and creating as a way to achieve other goals. that are not necessarily tied to overall economic growth or tied to trying to damage the environment, but it becomes a dichotomy that exists for somebody to achieve alternative ends. To say regulations are killing us and environmental regulations are a good way to go at them, and we see that being a part of the dialogue now. And I think while we see economic stagnation, while we're still thinking inside the box of economic growth being one model and one way only, which is put people back to work at all costs, not what type of work or to what ends are they working or what are the public projects that we need to have as a state, then we're going to continue seeing that we're not making progress on becoming a greener state. We're making progress on some other metric out there. So I'll kind of leave that. I know we've got lots of other people to kind of consider on this, but so I would say that if we look at, narrow down again, if we look at it, progress over the recent period, we've made significant strides and that we should be recognized for what we've been able to do. But right now it seems like there are political barriers which are not the will of the population as a whole. For example, if you look at the way that we've been voting in favor of green bonds, open space bonds as a state, clearly we identify as environmentalists as a whole, as an electorate, but we don't necessarily be reflected in our political leadership across the state.
All right, thanks. Well, obviously it's a pretty big topic. I'm just going to explain what I'm doing here. Because I'm an architect, and the rest of these folks have a lot to do with policy, advocacy, journalism. As an architect, I feel like I'm on the front lines. But I'll also explain why a lot of architects think they're the center of the universe on this issue, even though you probably don't see it that way. Buildings use about 50% of the energy we consume in this country. About another quarter is industry and another quarter is transportation. Guess what? Buildings have a lot to do with that transportation figure, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so optimistic. I'm bullish on Rhode Island being the greenest state in the country. The statistic that we put out there, Rhode Island, it does have the least energy use per capita. Why is that? A, we have beautiful summers, we don't need a lot of air conditioning, but it's also because we're one of the densest states in the country. It's not a factor against us. We have less far distances to drive to school, to work. Our goods have fewer distances to travel. Our density is what makes us green. We're ahead of the game. And if we're not the greenest state, it's not because we don't have a lot of built-in resources at our disposal. We've got density, we've also got a lot of historic buildings. Talk about embodied energy. These buildings are not only represent a lot of energy that we can just reuse and recycle, but they also happen to be in built-up areas where we have infrastructure. We don't need to build a new sewer line. We've got the sewer line right there. We're also making a lot of progress, as he mentioned, with the combined sewer overflow project. Water use is a huge energy issue. Not a lot of people think of it that way. But every time you flush that toilet, you've got water that took energy to clean and treat and get into your toilet. And on the outside, it's got a lot of energy. All those wind turbines that you see up at Fields Point, most of that, all of that energy actually is being used to treat our wastewater. So, I think we have a lot of potential and a long way to go, but I also have a lot of optimism.
My feelings are similar to Jamie's. I think we're greener than we give ourselves credit for. You can see that in terms of our overall emissions.
Apparently, I'm going to be that guy, the guy at the party that wrecks the party and all that. I'm a cynical pessimist. My wife calls me a grumpy old man, so that's my mind. That's my frame of mind when it comes to these things. And we had a couple, when ecoRI News started promoting this talk, which I thought was a great idea by Phil. People asked, some of the readers asked, how come you're so negative? It should be how, not why. And I disagree. We know how, we don't do it. And I don't think we do it well enough or even close to well enough because I don't think there's the political will to do it. And there's so many issues, examples of, there are good things, but like one thing that bugs the hell out of me and still does, URI is a land-grant university. And in the past few years, they've ripped up prime agricultural land to put in parking. What do we do up here at the State House? Green space, urban green space is important, so we rip up some around the State House to put in more parking. Because we don't do a good job, I don't think, funding our public transportation, planning for it, encouraging it, or even accepting it. So we put in more parking when we should be putting in less parking. And that bothers me. And that doesn't make us green. Look at the plastic bag ban. We've had debates, hearings, testimony, arguments. for the past couple of years about getting rid of plastic bags. 20 years, almost 20 years ago, Pakistan, the 6th most populous country in the world, banned plastic bags because they saw them as a useless product that basically ruined the environment, helped ruin the environment, or certainly a blight on the environment. We have one town, Barrington, who's got a plastic bag ban. It took them debates, hearings, a bunch of arguments about doing it. They did it to their credit, but it has a sunset provision, which after this year, it can go away because for some reason somebody might get upset they don't have plastic bags. At the state level, we've been talking about it, and guys up here and women up here have been pushing for it, but we have, like a senator just recently said that a plastic bag ban would be bad for business. It's a ridiculous and utterly inaccurate statement. But yet, it's the kind of stuff we're fighting against. Bottled water, I know Jamie and Abel have been working on that, trying to get that out of the State House. In fiscal 2011, we spent $110,000 on some 75,000 gallons of bottled water. A lot of it by our state agencies. A lot of it is drinking, drunk, whatever. At the State House, I'm a writer, not a speaker. I wish I was. But at the State House, and the EPA has said Providence's city water is some of the best in the country, yet they won't drink out of the bubbler. They have bottled water come in. And the argument I get to explain this ridiculousness is, oh, the pipes could be old, the water tastes bad out of the bubbler, or might have lead in it. And if that truly is the case, we could have used the money we used to rip up the lawn to put in new pipes at the State House. But we don't do that. And Abel had mentioned renewable energy and having, turbines, not Portsmouth-like high school-like turbines, but small ones on your house or on your roof or something. Well, then we have officials in Newport and Charlestown gleefully boasting that they basically made it illegal to have any wind turbine in those two towns. Even a small one that's no bigger than probably a DirecTV satellite dish. You can't have that on your house. You can have the satellite dish because you got to watch, some Desperate Housewives somewhere or something, but you can't have a wind turbine. It's things like that. If you want to, there's many ways to say how you want to be clean or not. Little things like that. If we can't even do that, and we have cleaned the bay, and we have done plenty of good things that the three speakers prior to me mentioned, but if you're going to be the greenest state, you got to have a foundation. We can't even get rid of plastic water bottles, plastic bags. You can't have a small turbine in your own house in at least 2 communities. And there's a long way to go. I'm not saying we're the worst state in the world or anything, worst state in the country or anything. I'm not from here. My wife's not from here, but we chose to live here. So there's plenty of good, but we're not even close to being the greenest, I don't think.
See, when you started talking, I was like, is Frank from Rhode Island? I didn't think he was from Rhode Island because he was totally talking like a Rhode Islander.
Well, Massachusetts is not that far away.
Because this is the thing. This, I think, is what we're reacting to with your question, Phil, is it's the way the Rhode Islander would ask the question, because it's like, oh, the Eeyore sensibility of, oh, yes, we have one of the most beautiful states in the country. I guess we'll get used to it. I think we just can't, put up with how awesome it is here. But we really do have quite a few things going on. You're not wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong at all.
I'm grumpy. I admit it.
And you are not the Eeyore. But you just sound like one.
Thank you.
Well, it's one of my favorite characters in the whole series, just to be clear. And I do love Rhode Island, and I moved here from away because it's one of the most stunning places that I've ever been to. It has some of the most beautiful beaches and some of the most beautiful natural resources available here, but it's also got the food that is really important to me, and it's got the culture that's really important to me, and because we've actually got the people who I think are really most concerned and willing to make this happen. I've worked in the progressive movement for the past 25 years in a wide variety of states and often in a national role. And the movement that we have here in Rhode Island is the most collaborative movement and the most high functioning of movements. And some days it doesn't feel that way. But really, we know how to work together, and I think it's part of the density thing. Like, you're going to see everybody in the grocery store the next day, you better figure out how to work with them. And that, we work together very well. And some of the people in the audience here, including Meg Kerr, have cultivated that in a way that makes it even more productive. And we are when we talk on national phone calls, the envy of other states, because we do know how to work together, we do know how to get things done, and we have gotten quite a bit done. There's a lot that we have not yet done, a lot of stupid things that have not yet been accomplished. It's totally true. But we've got a Lead Hazard Mitigation Act that is the envy of many other states. We're number 6 in the country for energy efficiency, as Phil reported today.
Number 1 in 2011. We're 1.
Number 1 in 2011. So yeah, but you know, some people say that rankings are rigged, and we dropped to number 6 because, you know, the population, blah blah blah, and California, Massachusetts. But we have astounding energy efficiency laws, which is really important in this part of the country. We have more producer responsibility laws than most states. We hold manufacturers accountable for taking back and recycling their products and driving that kind of change. We've got offshore wind, that's the envy of many other places. Again, the food and the agriculture, the movement that's been happening around that in the last 5 years, I think has the potential to be transformative. We've, you know, had a movement take on big interests like Southern Union and wind. Doesn't happen overnight, but we have a committed movement, and we win really big and important battles on a fairly regular basis here in Rhode Island. Our mercury products laws are one example of why that matters, because it's also part of the Rhode Island thing to say, what does it matter if we do it in Rhode Island because we're so tiny and whatever. But it actually has made national and international difference that we have been able to accomplish so many things here in Rhode Island. Back in 2001, when we were first talking about phasing out products that contain mercury, we had manufacturers coming to the state and saying, no way, the world will, you know, collapse if we stop having mercury in our thermostats and consumers will revolt. But the General Assembly, in its wisdom, actually passed that law anyway and phased out any number of products that contain mercury. Button cell batteries, thermostats, all sorts of things, thermometers. And not only did the world continue to exist, but those manufacturers, 1 or 2 years later, were sending out their press releases about how awesomely green they are. They are completely mercury-free, and try out our new products. You're going to love them. And not only were they able to sell those products mercury-free here in Rhode Island, but by 2011, mercury button cell battery manufacturers had completely phased out mercury internationally in their international line of products. Several other states had followed Rhode Island after we passed that law, but it shows that we actually can play a really important role in the global environmental movement from here in little old Rhode Island. And of course it makes a difference even more locally too. You know, Phil covered the story of what happened when we stopped using our rivers for sewage and for toxic waste dumping. It turns out we wanted to see them again, so we uncovered them and built up a nice, beautiful, you know, way for people to access the rivers. And then it turns out that over 10 million people came down to see Waterfire, and we built high-rises with people who work there every day and live there every day who want to be near our rivers again. So these are the ways that it actually makes a difference when we do it. But Frank is right, and we're totally not done, and we've got a landfill that's going to fill up in 25 years, and we've got unemployment, and we've got cash-poor municipalities, and aging infrastructure that keeps me up at night now that I have the job that I have. We have the impacts of climate change that we are already seeing, and fortunately Rhode Islanders are actually seeing it, understand what they are seeing. And we've got some disadvantages compared to our neighbors. We don't, you know, have the tax base that our neighbors do. We don't have the population size, and it's honestly harder to draw national attention and national investment in Rhode Island, partly because we don't have that population size. National funders like to see, you know, big bang for the buck, and that makes it a little bit harder to do our work here, which means that we do need those strategies that are going to address multiple problems at one time, because there's not going to be enough money to go around to solve each of these things individually as with some magic bullet. But I think you're right, Phil, that it is lots of different kinds of jobs. When we solve all of these types of problems, we're going to need lots of green infrastructure, we're going to need local agriculture, we're going to need more public transit, we're going to need energy efficiency and renewables, and all of those things are just the pieces of what it is. But all of those things are lots of different kinds of jobs. So it's engineers and plumbers and electricians and auditors and horticulturalists and farmers and bus drivers and carpenters. It's real jobs, and a lot of those jobs are Some of them are the high-tech jobs that we get really excited about here in Rhode Island, but lots of them are the low barrier to entry career track jobs that we need a lot more of, especially here in Providence. And so my last bit of this rant is longer than I thought. Phil threatened to play music to cut us off like they cut me is that leadership matters. So it matters who our elected officials are, because, you know, as I am learning in my role in municipal government, there's a lot that we can do on the city level, and I am fortunate to be working in a very progressive administration that's allowing us to move forward on a lot of these initiatives, but we can't do it alone as municipalities. We need state leadership and federal support in order to be able to accomplish these goals. And then there's the leadership from the grassroots that's really critical. We have good people at all levels of government in Rhode Island who want to do all of the things that we're talking about here on this panel tonight, and they need to hear it from the grassroots in order to be able to accomplish all of those things. And then we'll be the greenest state.